Let's do this video over again about what is the best fishing line for an absolute beginner. Now, fishing lines do not have to be complicated, okay? And you don't have to be buying the most expensive line on the shelf either, and I'm going to explain all of that. So what is the best line for a beginner? Well, none other than our friend monofilament, aka mono, also known as the nylon fishing line. It's got to be the best for a beginner. And as I said before, you don't need to buy the brand names either. So let's talk about that. Brand names such as Trilene, Rapala, Shakespeare, you're probably familiar with those names if you have done a little bit of fishing. Those are big brand names here in North America, but they are expensive. Yes, they're very good lines, but there's also nothing wrong with getting the off-brand names that are made by Cabela or Bass Pro, even Walmart, and here in Canada, even Canadian Tire. There is nothing wrong with them whatsoever, especially for beginners. They're a fraction of the price as well. I mean, you don't want to be spending all this money to find out you don't enjoy the sport. So you might as well go a little cheaper to start out with and see how it goes. And as you become more experienced and more serious, then you can spend the money on the more expensive lines. So let's talk about monofilament and why is it beneficial for the beginner. Okay, well, first off, because it is a lot cheaper than the other lines, okay? For example, this spool here is an off-brand name that I picked up last year because I needed some fishing line. It's 400 yards here, and I paid $4 Canadian for it. Now, if that was a brand name such as Rapala or Trilene, I'd be paying close to $20 for this spool. And if it was sorry, not monofilament, but if it was the other lines such as braided lines or fluorocarbons, I'd be paying maybe $60 or $70 for this spool. So what would you rather do when you're starting out? You just need to pick up line, a little bit of line for something. I'd rather pay the $4 than be paying out a grocery bill for fishing line. It doesn't make sense unless you're a serious angler. All right, pros. Well, obviously the price. Secondly, nylon fishing line has something called stretch, also known as forgiveness. And what does that mean? Well, when you're snagging your first fish, you got to set the hook, right? If there's no forgiveness in the line, no stretch, you'll simply just pop that hook and bait right out of the fish's mouth. But having that stretch gives you just a little bit more give that you can probably try and set the hook a second time and even a third time. I've actually done it on the third set because I was using a monofilament line that had some stretch to it. Now, of course, the line needs to be fresh to get the ultimate stretch out of it, to get the best use of the stretch or forgiveness out of it, because once it starts to age, it will deteriorate and become brittle. All right, so it has forgiveness. That's a good thing for a beginner who's learning how to set the hook. The second thing is that it comes in various test weights, all the way from 2-pound test up to 200 and some odd pound test. Now, what does that mean? Well, here in North America, we rate fishing line, I should say, by pounds test, and that is the strength of the fishing line and where it will break. So 2-pound test up to 200-pound test. You've got a great variety of different strengths of lines for different types of fishing that you might do with monofilament. For a beginner, you don't need anything more than 8-pound test, between 4 and 8-pound test. Matter of fact, stick with 6-pound test. You won't go wrong with it. Most combos that you buy, that is the rod and reel, and if you're lucky to get a reel that is spooled, it will be spooled with 6-pound test. And most of the combos are rated between 4 and 8-pound test for the average angler. Matter of fact, I think, the lucky number 6 comes up in fishing. A 6'6" rod with a reel that's rated for 6-pound test, and they tell you the best hooks to use for a beginner, number size 6. Everything 6. Even when you're tying your fishing knots, wrap the tail end or the tag end around the main line 6 times before you cinch down on the knot. 6 is a lucky number in fishing for some reason. So yeah, don't go over 8-pound test. You don't need it. Not for the beginners type pan fishing that you're probably going to do. Between 4 and 8-pound test. I use that rating. Matter of fact, I don't think I have a reel anymore that's got anything over 8 pound. And let me put up some photographs here for you to take a look at. And I'll put up the information on the name of the line and the test weight I was using at the time when I caught them. Now, these two here were caught on 4-pound test. It was the Daiwa line, which is a Japanese line. You can, it's actually a very good line. Fairly inexpensive. No problem bringing those beauties in. Here's another one. I think it was a 6-pound test for this one here. I was using Cabela's line. Here's another one. Same thing, Cabela's line or Bass Pro line, about 6-pound test. And these beauties here, again, 4-pound test. Nothing over 8-pound test. And this guy, now this one I got very, very lucky on. This is a 17 or 18-inch pike that I caught 2 years ago on a mangy piece of 6-pound test line. I got him in one piece. Just as I lifted him up, yes, the line did break, but I still landed it with 6-pound test. What is that telling you? There is nothing wrong with using those light lines and using an off-brand name. It'll save you a lot of money, but once you become more experienced and you get more serious about fishing, you become more species specific. Sure, if you want to use the heavy test weight lines, then, go right ahead. Now, what's some of the drawbacks of using monofilament? Well, one thing you got to be careful, as I mentioned before, monofilament does deteriorate. It dries out. And once that happens, it becomes brittle and it will snap. So you do have to change out your reel a little bit more than you would if you were using braided lines or fluorocarbon lines because they dry out. What causes them to dry out? Well, UV rays. Doesn't like the sun. Don't be laying out your fishing equipment in the sun to dry after a day of fishing, all right? Because UV rays just dry it right up after a while. Same thing with salt water. They dry up very quickly with salt water. So if you want to use monofilament in saltwater fishing, get the mono that is rated for saltwater fishing. It'll tell you right on the package if it is. And a similar thing with ice fishing. You can get monofilament that's rated for ice fishing. It's just they're treated differently so they don't deteriorate as quick when they're either frozen or dried out by salt water. So keep that in mind if you want to use mono for ice fishing and saltwater fishing. Make sure it's rated for those two types of fishing, okay? So yes, it will dry out. You will have to probably change your reel a little bit more often than what you would using the more expensive lines. How often should you change that out? If you're going to use monofilament on a very regular basis, I would say every 3 times you go fishing, I change it out just to make sure you don't lose that fish. I know people don't. People use the same line for years on their reel, and then they wonder why it keeps breaking. That's because mono dries out. All right, so that is a drawback to using mono. It dries out. The only other good thing about mono is it's a very good knotting line. It's got good knot strength. All right, when you tie a knot, if you tie the fishing knot properly, the strength, the line allows it to lock in and gives the knot a lot of strength, so they shouldn't come undone, but make sure you tie it properly. And also, the more modern lines that they're making now, they've got a very high resistance to abrasion, which is good as well. Before the older lines, even when they were new, they were soft and they would scuff up as they're being dragged along the bottom. The newer lines are a lot more stronger than what they used to be. So you've got a high resistance to abrasion with these lines too. So yeah, that because of that, they're a great line for a beginner. You don't have to worry about putting leaders on them either. A leader is usually a nylon line on a braid or a nano line. You don't need that. You just fish straight through on your setup with your nylon line. So it's a very versatile line, and I would strongly recommend you looking into getting nylon line and using that for your first fishing trip. And as I say before, I can't stress it enough. Don't get conned into the expensive fishing lines. You don't need them. Just get yourself a Cabela's or a Bass Pro or a Walmart brand, and they will work. Okay? Right. Monofilament for a beginner. Absolutely. 100%. All right. So this is Sharon. Until our next video, and I promise I will put up more on the how-to. I've got another video coming up in that. Just doing a few things right now. They're taking me away from my videos, but we'll get it up for you so that you can learn how to set up your fishing rod. All right. Until then, this is Sharon saying, tight lines.